Tonight, the brazen robbery caught on camera. 14 thieves storm a Louis Vuitton store in the Chicago area, sweeping inside in broad daylight and grabbing nearly the entire store's stock of purses on display. Today in a Georgia court, the man who shot and killed Ahmaud Arbery admitted Arbery was unarmed and never verbally threatened him. Travis McMichael testifying Arbery was, quote, just running. And the judge denying the defense request for a mistrial. We'll have the latest. Plus, in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, as we wait for a verdict, the possibility of a mistrial looms there. We're standing by, waiting to be joined by the family of one of the men Rittenhouse shot. Boosters for all adults, the big decision coming that could mean everyone vaccinated 18 and older could be eligible for Pfizer and Moderna boosters by this weekend. And with the midterms less than a year away, career election officials facing increasing threats, some even considering leaving their posts. But tonight there's concern about who may be replacing them.
I think everyone should accept that we're at a very dangerous juncture right now, when you have a majority of my party believe that the 2020 election was fraudulent.
Plus, with just a week to Thanksgiving, many across the country are experiencing extreme temperature swings. Wild weather patterns could snarl holiday traffic on the ground and in the air for millions. Our Rob Marciano has you covered tonight with what you need to know before you hit the road. The sounds of joy, relief, and praise that a man sentenced to death will not be executed. Julius Jones is alive tonight after Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt called off his execution just hours before Jones was scheduled to die. The governor commuting his sentence to life in prison after a years-long international campaign calling on the governor to intervene. And good evening, I'm Trevor Ault in for Lindsay Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us on a very busy Thursday night. We are tracking how soon all American adults could receive COVID booster shots. There's the possibility of a holiday travel nightmare, and a busy night is unfolding on Capitol Hill. But first, we begin with the defense resting its case in the trial of 3 Georgia men in the shooting death of Ahmaud Arbery. Today, defendant Travis McMichael, who shot and killed Arbery, testifying for a second day and under questioning from the prosecution, admitting Arbery never said anything to him, didn't seem to have a weapon, and kept trying to get away before McMichael shot him with a shotgun. Outside the courtroom today, a prayer vigil by supporters of Arbery's family, led by hundreds of black pastors. The judge now sending the jury home until Monday, when this trial heads into a new phase. ABC senior national correspondent Steve Osunsami leads us off in Georgia.
Outside the Glenn County Courthouse in Georgia today, hundreds of black pastors and people closely watching this case came to pray with the family of Ahmaud Arbery and their legal team.
God, we're looking for a miracle.
Inside the courtroom, where the family is hoping for justice, prosecutors continued to question one of the 3 men accused of murder and other charges in this racially explosive case.
How many times have you pulled up on strangers that you don't know next to them with a pickup truck to ask them what they're doing in your neighborhood?
I don't think I have in that situation, but I have pulled up on people that are running behind, coming up behind them.
Travis McMichael, who fired the fatal shots that killed Arbery in February of last year, had to admit that before the shooting, his victim posed him no physical or verbal threat.
Never threatened you at all?
No, ma'am. Yeah, he did not threaten me verbally. No, ma'am.
All right. Didn't brandish any weapons?
No, ma'am.
Didn't pull out any guns?
No, ma'am.
Didn't pull out any knife?
No, ma'am.
Never reached for anything, did he?
No.
He just ran?
Yes, he was just running.
McMichael, his father Gregory McMichael, and a neighbor William Roddy Bryan have all pleaded not guilty. They say they were trying to make a citizen's arrest under then Georgia law, but prosecutors say the victim wasn't the thief they were thinking and wasn't the only person seen wandering this home that was under construction in the neighborhood. Today we heard from other neighbors, at least 2 of them women of color, who were witnesses for the defense. They testified that the issue was crime and that they felt scared seeing strangers on neighborhood security cameras.
Violated. Upset that my kids weren't getting to grow up in the safe neighborhood I grew up in.
And Steve Osunsami joins us now. Steve, now that both the prosecution and the defense have rested here, what comes next in this trial?
So tomorrow, the judge is going to discuss the charging documents and some other motions that are still outstanding. But at this point, what it's looking like is that closing arguments could begin as soon as Monday morning, and then the jury would be handed this case. Trevor?
I am curious, Steve, because this was such highly anticipated testimony from Travis McMichael. We heard him there say that Ahmaud Arbery was just running. I'm curious just what struck you about his testimony today?
A couple things. One of the things that struck me was the questioning that the prosecutor delivered about what Travis McMichael said to him when he confronted him and how the victim reacted. She asked him, did he yell at you? No. Did he say anything to you? No. Did he threaten you physically? No. Travis McMichael said no each time on the witness stand, helping make the prosecution's case a little bit. The other thing that struck me was the defense witnesses who were neighbors who lived in the Satilla Shores neighborhood, who were women of color, who testified that they were concerned about crime, that people in the neighborhood were concerned about crime and were essentially upset and frightened by seeing strangers on their security camera videos. It was a strong moment for the defense in that little area. But, we will all see, of course, how this jury reacts. You just can never really predict. Trevor?
Of course, and the demonstrators raised that question, Steve, of even if a person was stealing, does that mean that they deserve necessarily to die? Steve Osunsami from Georgia with more great reporting. Steve, thank you. Now to the battle against COVID. A new study confirming the effectiveness of masks, including mask wearing, cuts incidences of COVID-19 by more than 50%. And this comes as millions await a final decision on whether booster shots will be authorized for all adults, as certain states are seeing an uptick in cases. ABC's Whit Johnson has more.
Tonight, the FDA expected to authorize booster shots for all adults at any moment, paving the way for a robust rollout of third doses this weekend.
The rate of disease is markedly lower for those who received their booster shot, demonstrating our boosters are working.
But today, Massachusetts and Utah joining a dozen other states and getting ahead of the CDC, allowing Pfizer and Moderna boosters for everyone 18 and older.
What we're seeing is that with immunity waning and cases climbing, there's a recognition that anyone over 18 with the right amount of time should be eligible for a booster.
The booster buildup coming amid growing fears of another winter surge. Cases across the country are up 35% since late October. 18 states seeing an increase in hospital admissions. In New Mexico, doctors struggling to care for a stream of COVID patients.
Our situation right now is dire. Most of these patients are unvaccinated. This is overwhelming our healthcare system.
In Maine, Bettina Lerman was unvaccinated and ended up on a ventilator with COVID.
I love you.
In a coma for more than a month, her family was already planning a funeral when they got a call from the doctor.
I need you to come up to the hospital right away. I'm like, what? Is something wrong? And he goes, well, your mother just woke up. I literally dropped the phone. I was like, what? I mean, because we were supposed to be terminating life support that day.
Loved ones calling it a medical miracle, saying Bettina now plans to get vaccinated when she's better.
I think the right thing to do is to get vaccinated. So if one of our family members gets it again, it won't be that bad.
Miracle news for that family, but of course, so many have not been so lucky. Whit Johnson joins us now. Whit, walk us through these final steps here for these booster shots in order to get cleared for all adults across the country.
Trevor, tomorrow a CDC advisory panel will meet to discuss booster shots and is expected to make recommendations. The CDC director would then give the final green light, which could mean a new wave of boosters going into arms this weekend. Trevor?
Long awaited for a lot of people. Whit Johnson, thank you. To Washington now, and the House tonight making a big move on the second part of President Biden's domestic agenda, that massive human infrastructure bill. So let's get straight to ABC's Stephanie Ramos. Stephanie, this is a big step tonight, but there is, of course, still a long road ahead here, right?
Exactly, Trevor. The House is moving forward tonight to vote on this sweeping bill, which comes at a $1.75 trillion price tag. But this bill dedicates a record $500 billion to fighting climate change. It includes money for universal pre-K, elder care, and a one-year extension of the child tax credit. It also would expand Medicare to cover hearing and bring down the cost of prescription drugs. Also included paid family leave, but that is likely on the chopping block when this heads over to the Senate, and that's because of moderate Joe Manchin. We've heard from him the last couple of weeks. He is opposed to paid family leave. He says he is worried about the cost of the bill amid rising inflation. But the White House says this bill pays for itself. And tonight, the Congressional Budget Office agrees. But Trevor, there is still a really long road ahead. This bill facing major headwinds in the Senate, where President Biden cannot afford to lose a single Democratic vote. Trevor.
And we already saw the hair splitting to get the first bill passed. Stephanie Ramos from Washington. Stephanie, thank you. Now to the temperature whiplash and the possible holiday travel nightmare for millions. Our senior meteorologist, Rob Marciano, tracking it all. Rob, good evening.
Hey, good evening, Trevor. Very dynamic weather pattern shaping up for the eastern half of the country, beginning with that big temperature swing that most of us are going to feel here. We've already felt it in places like Chicago and much of the upper Midwest and Great Lakes. Temperatures there in the 30s and 40s. Meanwhile, today, temperatures on the East Coast were in the 60s. So that front will push through tonight with a little bit of rainfall and then windy and colder by 20 or 30 degrees by tomorrow morning, and 40 degrees all the way down to Atlanta. Sets the stage for a pretty quiet but cold weekend for much of the country. And then this next system kind of drops in from Canada as a clipper into the Great Lakes. By Monday morning, it really starts to develop and intensify. And we're probably going to see some problems. This is when people obviously start to travel for the holidays. So Chicago O'Hare, Detroit, Cleveland, Cincinnati, I think we'll see winds. We'll see some snow potentially accumulating, and mostly rain, but still an issue from Charlotte up through the New York airports and then through Boston. And then this low continues to progress off towards the east and kind of digs and develops a coastal low and scoops another low up into it. And when that happens, these things tend to sit. And this one's going to sit off the east coast of New England. And here's a map for 5 in the morning on Wednesday. A lot of wind behind this, certainly some snow. Probably just accumulating in places like Albany and points northward. But the question is, how long does this low sit and spin on Wednesday, potentially Thursday and Friday will determine how big of a mess we have through the holiday itself and into the holiday weekend. We could see very breezy conditions for a good chunk of it, but it's too early to tell at this point. But prepare yourself if you are doing some traveling anywhere in the eastern third of the country to have to deal with some weather impacts, certainly the beginning of this holiday. Trevor?
Rob Marciano, thanks so much. Next to the jury deliberations in Kenosha, Wisconsin at the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse. After days of discussion, there is still no verdict. But there was one shocking moment today with the judge announcing what he called a very serious matter. ABC's Terry Moran is there again for us tonight.
Tonight, a third long day of deliberations has come to a close. Jurors still working to determine the fate of Kyle Rittenhouse, charged with killing 2 men and injuring a third with an AR-15 rifle during violent protests last year. Rittenhouse says he acted in self-defense. But outside the presence of the jury today, a shocking moment in court.
I have instructed that no one from MSNBC News will be permitted in this building for the duration of this trial.
The judge bans MSNBC from the trial after Kenosha police say they pulled over a man affiliated with the network. He ran a red light near the bus designated for jurors and said he'd been told to follow it.
That is a it's extremely serious matter.
NBC News issued a statement saying the freelancer never contacted or intended to contact the jurors during deliberations and never photographed or intended to photograph them, adding, "We regret the incident."
Terry Moran joins us now from Wisconsin. And Terry, I've heard from our producers here that from the beginning you were expecting this likely would not be a verdict until Friday. And now here we are, the jurors deliberating for more than 22 hours. I would love to hear, with all of your years of experience covering trials like these, can you read anything from the tea leaves as we await this verdict?
Well, I can try to read the tea leaves, Trevor. I should warn you, though, I'm often wrong about it. But what we do know clearly, based on what we've seen, is that this jury is working hard, right? From the beginning of their deliberations, they started by asking for the jury instructions, the law, the roadmap for their deliberations, and a copy for each of the jurors. One juror today asked if they could take it home. The judge said yes. They've also reviewed, as a group, a lot of the video evidence in this case, and there's a ton of it, right? All these 3 separate shooting incidents videoed from from various angles. They've reviewed that. But today, interestingly, no questions from the jury, no requests for evidence, no questions on the law. They're hashing it out clearly. And it's a hard case. Look, you wouldn't know that. Like, everybody seems to have an opinion on this case on social media. Everybody's dead certain, right? But certainty is cheap on social media. It's hard-earned in the jury room, and that is what they are doing. They are working hard to see if they can come to a verdict.
Which is all we can ask them to do, Terry, with the world watching and waiting for that verdict. Terry Moran in Wisconsin, thank you. And as we continue to wait for that verdict tonight, we want to bring in Susan Hughes. She is the great aunt of Anthony Huber, who was the second person that Kyle Rittenhouse shot and killed. Ms. Hughes, we are very sorry for your loss. We appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thank you.
I would just like to ask first and foremost, this would be difficult enough what your family is going through without international attention and a heavily divided populace where everyone has opinions. How are you and the rest of Anthony's family holding up right now?
Everyone is tired. I mean, and there's only a small group of us that I'm talking about anyway. Although I personally have a lot of cousins all over the country and world. So, you know, randomly I hear from that cousins in Germany are following the trial. That's been surprising. One of your ABC colleagues from Chicago asked me this afternoon what had changed in my life. And, you know, number one, I'm not accustomed to talking to national media every day. So that's been a jarring experience for me, and particularly for Hannah and for Carrie Ann as well. So it's difficult when you want to maintain some element of privacy and still take an opportunity to correct a lot of the misinformation that's out there.
Of course. On that subject, Susan, you testified here in this trial, and your testimony came to somewhat of an abrupt end. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe expand on that, because the last question that you were asked was, had you ever seen Anthony run toward danger? And you said yes. Can you expand on what you meant when you said yes to that?
Yeah, I'll give you a little background of how I even recalled this. The day before Anthony died, he had called me and asked, we have a memorial bench for my son out in a county park, and Anthony and I would frequently go out there to talk. And he was concerned. He knew Jacob Blake. He wanted to talk about that. So we went out to the bench, and as we're talking, he talked about, you know, his feelings about how Jacob's, you know, arrest and things were handled in the shooting. But one of the conversation evolved, as it always did, kind of random. And he got on to talking about how people react in crisis. And you know, how some people run towards things, some people freeze in place. And he said, Aunt Susie, do you remember Liz's wedding? Liz is my daughter. And when my daughter was married, we had a backyard barbecue. And one of the things that happened that day was the propane tank for the barbecue ignited. And it let off a scream, like just chilling. And every adult in the place ran to the opposite side of the yard. And only a family friend who knew what to do, and Anthony, who was only 6 years old at the time, ran towards the tank. And they cooled it down with a hose and whatever. And he was chiding me. He said, you know, and you know, Susie, you stood there trying to figure out how everybody was going to get out of the yard because the gate was behind the barbecue. So it was like, I was the analytical person. He was the person who responded immediately. And that happened literally the day before he died, that conversation. So when I learned later what he had done that evening, you know, I was horrified to find out that he had run to disarm the shooter. But I was not at all surprised. I remember the first thing that came to my mind was, yeah, of course. You know, that would have been Anthony.
So your answer to that question wasn't to say that you'd seen him run toward danger because you'd seen him be aggressive. You meant it as that he'd been helpful in the past.
Right, yeah. He was very, and even in other small ways, he had recently moved back into the family home by himself. He was renovating that house, and his next door neighbor had a situation where she was getting tickets from the city for not taking care of her lawn. All the neighbors just looked at it, did nothing. Anthony, who had no money and no resources, you know, scrounged around to find a mower to cut her grass so she wouldn't have to pay the tickets from the city. That he was very much, there's a problem in front of me. I know how to fix it. I'm going to go do it.
Kyle Rittenhouse has painted your nephew as the aggressor. And in his testimony the other day, everyone watched, he broke down in tears as he was telling the story of what happened that night. How did you feel watching that testimony?
I honestly did not feel that was a remorseful crime. That was, I'm caught. It makes me anxious. I'm having to deal with this in public. I'm emotionally crying, you know. I never heard him say he was sorry. He did say he didn't want to kill one of the people he was asked about. I'm not sure if it was Anthony or Rosenbaum, but I didn't ever hear, I'm sorry, I take responsibility. That never came out of his mouth. There was just a lot of emotional churning like you see from a child. It was just reinforced for me that he was not emotionally mature enough to be in that situation in the first place, and he's not really emotionally mature enough to handle it and process it now. And he's not getting good reinforcement from the adults around him when his defense attorney says, you know, Rosenbaum was a mentally deranged person, and I'm glad he killed him. And that was part of his closing argument. So, yeah, he responded to me that was, I'm trapped, and it's an emotional release.
Just a final question quickly, Susan. These trials are stressful enough. There's been so much that's come out of how this trial has been handled, whether it's be things that the judge has said, Kyle Rittenhouse picking jurors out of a hat. Now today, the judge announcing that media members were maybe following the jury. How have you felt about how this whole trial process has been handled?
Well, for one thing, I can't respond to what happened during the prosecution segment because I was a witness. I couldn't be there. And I couldn't watch it. I was there for closing arguments, though. That's when I first got to hear some stuff and have heard from people what went on earlier in the trial. Even today, when they asked for allowed the jury to take the instructions home, and after the jury was out of the room, the judge made a comment to the effect that they might be researching you know, how to interpret the directions. Does that allow them to be on the internet? That's confusing at best, and yeah, I'm not a legal expert, but that made me uncomfortable.
Totally understandable. Susan Hughes, we really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for talking through all that with us. And regardless of the verdict, we wish your family the best.
Thank you.
To Oklahoma now, where Julius Jones will go to bed tonight knowing he will never have to worry about being executed by the state ever again after the governor commuted his execution after, quote, prayerful consideration, and that decision was made in the final hours. ABC's Marcus Moore has the details of what's next.
Tonight, jubilation after Oklahoma's governor granted clemency to death row inmate Julius Jones, sparing his life nearly 4 hours before his execution. Governor Kevin Stitt choosing life without parole for Jones, despite calls from supporters and family, saying in a statement, "After prayerful consideration and reviewing materials presented by all sides of this case, I have determined to commute Julius Jones' sentence to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." Jones also not eligible for a future pardon. Still outside the prison, crowds breaking out in song. His sister telling me she and Jones spoke after the news. His first words to her, "I love you."
As best you can describe what that moment was like.
It's a blessing to be able to hear his voice and to know that he will still be alive.
Jones was a college student in 1999 when he was charged with murdering Paul Howell during a carjacking outside of Oklahoma City. Investigators finding a gun wrapped in a red bandana in Jones's house after they interviewed 2 other suspects. He was convicted and sentenced to death in 2002. For more than 20 years, Jones and his lawyers have maintained his innocence, claiming he was framed.
So many people vocal about this case, and it still came down to the final moments there. Marcus Moore joins us now. Marcus, of course, having this execution commuted is a win for Julius Jones' family. But to be clear, he is still not a free man here, and there could be a lot more work to be done. What are you hearing about the next steps?
Well, Trevor, that's absolutely right. The next steps at this point are unclear. But as you just pointed out, under the governor's decision, Jones is not eligible for parole. Also, he cannot apply or seek any other commutations. And the family, at the same time, his sister told me today that despite that, they are determined and they are faithful, and they say that their fight to have him freed is not over. Trevor.
Marcus Moore for us. Marcus, thank you. And when we come back, the remarkable escape from a car crash that you have to see to believe. But up next, more and more election officials concerned about their safety. With the midterms less than a year away, we take a closer look at where things stand.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live.
All right, we're gonna move back. Let's move back.
We're surrounded by people squeezing into this bomb shelter.
We're on an urgent delivery run.
Not afraid to go there.
So my question, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Breaking news, live events.
This is the moment.
Streaming straight to you, anytime, anywhere.
You just met one friend right here.
You're watching ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us.
It was an extraordinary story.
A computer salesman was supposed to report to prison to begin a 17-year sentence.
They let him turn himself into jail with no escort.
No one thought he would run.
How do you evade capture for 25 years? How do you do that?
Now, join the search, following the U.S. Marshals as they uncover new leads in a global manhunt. Can you help catch this fugitive?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man? Listen and join the all-new hunt wherever you get your podcasts.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
The ladies you love, the hottest topics happening now. There's only one place to find it all.
You guys are having the hard conversations. I love The View.
The most watched #1 daytime talk show is The View. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
Let's do this. When you wake up in the morning, when you wake up in the morning, darling, I'll be by your side.
More Americans choose ABC News, America's #1 news source.
Well, take a look at these images. Memphis police are looking for these two suspects who they say gunned down rapper Young Dolph, who was inside a cookie store. Police are asking the public for any assistance. Tonight, less than a year until the 2022 midterms, and there's growing concern by some about the number of career election officials who are facing threats or feeling unsafe on the job, in some cases opting to resign entirely. So what does this mean for our elections going forward? Elizabeth Schulze reports.
I think everyone should accept that we're at a very dangerous juncture right now. When you have a majority of my party believe that the 2020 election was fraudulent.
It was a batch of votes here in Philadelphia, the birthplace of American democracy, that tipped the 2020 presidential election toward Joe Biden, putting a longtime election official in the spotlight for doing his job.
For us, it's really never about who wins and who loses. It's really about counting the votes.
For days, Republican City Commissioner Al Schmidt had been holed up in the convention center, making sure every vote, mail-in or in person, was counted.
It's the foundation of the whole thing.
That every vote counts.
That every vote counts and that everyone's voice is heard. And at the end of the day, you have a winner and you have a loser. And the loser accepts defeat because they lost. And in Pennsylvania, the election wasn't even close.
Schmidt defended the vote count, making himself a target. He became one of many career election officials facing increasing threats, fueling what some say is an unprecedented exodus.
There is, I'm sure, no election official in the country that when they ran for the job ever contemplated death threats, let alone death threats to their children, as being part of that job description.
4 days after the election was called, former President Trump singled out Schmidt in a tweet, saying without evidence, he refuses to look at a mountain of corruption and dishonesty. That's when the phone calls and messages threatening Schmidt ramped up.
They became a lot more specific, a lot more graphic, largely targeted my family, my kids, my little kids.
What were some of the most alarming threats that you personally received?
Well, I mean, they got pretty specific. I mean, mentioning my children by name, my address, pictures of my house. Like the people who sent them had clearly done their homework.
Schmidt says he won't seek another term in 2023. In Pennsylvania, nearly half of county election directors have resigned since 2019. Many cite personal and violent threats.
When they see what they're facing, it becomes much, much harder to get good people to do these jobs.
What's happening here in Pennsylvania is part of a wider trend across the country. State and local election board members are facing ongoing threats just for trying to do their jobs.
There are nights where we have slept with sheriff's deputies outside of the house because of these threats.
Bill Gates is a Republican on the Board of Supervisors in Maricopa County, Arizona, a hotbed of election misinformation, despite several recounts and audits confirming President Biden's win.
And Mr. Gates, you are now recognized.
Gates defended the integrity of the results under oath in Congress.
This is without a doubt the biggest threat to our democracy in my lifetime.
Now, more than a year after the election, he says he's still targeted daily online, called a traitor who should be jailed.
I never could have imagined that this would still be going on a year later.
It's not just local election officials in swing states under threat. A recent survey by the Brennan Center for Justice found 1 in every 3 election officials nationwide feel unsafe at work, and nearly 1 in 5 say threats to their lives are a job-related concern.
We're seeing election officials from all across the country decide that they no longer want to serve in these positions where they work crazy hours, they don't make that much money, and they are subjected to death threats.
Democrat Roxanna Moritz resigned as chief election officer in Scott County, Iowa, in the wake of the 2020 election, after more than a decade on the job.
The personal attacks on each and every one of us has made some of us aware of this maybe isn't where we want to be. You're going to see an exodus from some of us.
Election experts warn about the loss of institutional knowledge after this wave of resignations from roles that are historically above the political fray.
Do we have any sense yet who is replacing those workers who are leaving?
And I think one of the concerns is, we've seen, for instance, some candidates for Secretary of State, which is generally the chief election official in the state, who have come out and said that they basically believe in the big lie.
Bill Gates in Maricopa County insists he won't step down.
There's nothing more important I've ever done professionally than fighting for democracy.
USA! USA!
He fears another January 6th, where rioters were convinced to violently storm the U.S. Capitol to disrupt the certification of the election results if elected officials don't stand up to the big lie.
I have to plead with these folks to listen to me, to the truth that I'm telling them, because they've been told lies for a year now and they believe it.
What's your message to members of your own party who are still not distancing themselves from this lie that the election was stolen, that the results were rigged?
I think there is an additional obligation on Republicans like myself to speak the truth about the 2020 election and to stand up in the face of all of these lies, regardless of what the consequences are for any of us.
Even if it means endangering yourself to try to do that?
Well, with our democracy on the line, pretty much anything is worth it.
Our thanks to Elizabeth Scholze for that report. And still ahead here on Prime, the growing backlash over why a judge decided against giving jail time to a 20-year-old who pleaded guilty to sexually assaulting 14 girls. Plus, the Manhattan DA explaining why he's exonerated 2 men tied to the assassination of Malcolm X and his harsh words for the people involved at the time. And the John Deere strike coming to an end with workers getting several of their demands. We take a look by the numbers. But first, our post of the day, Jonah Hill in an upcoming movie as the Grateful Dead's Jerry Garcia.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live.
All right, we're gonna move back. Let's move back. We're surrounded by people squeezing into this bomb shelter.
We're on an urgent delivery run.
Not afraid to go there.
So my question, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Breaking news, live events.
This is the moment.
Streaming straight to you, anytime, anywhere.
You just met one friend right here.
You're watching ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
Can I hug you?
Yes.
So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 12 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
This is American history, a violent white mob, a brutal attack, 300 Black Americans killed right here in America. Now, it is time to uncover Tulsa's buried truth, the gripping story brought to light in a new podcast from ABC News, available now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
Sex, gambling, fraud, betrayal, and murder. Cutthroat Inc., the podcast. A family on a mission to find their son. A year's worth of conversations with the killer. Cutthroat Inc. Subscribe for free now on your favorite podcast app. Assault on the Capitol, the ABC News original, exclusively on Hulu, now streaming. Now with so much on the line, more Americans are turning to David Muir and ABC's World News Tonight than any other program across all of television.
Now to the big win for thousands of workers at John Deere, who just approved a new labor deal after months on the picket line. This is the latest in a wave of labor activism that's sweeping the country. So here's a look by the numbers. By a vote of 61% to 39%, the unionized workers of John Deere approved this deal, which gives them an $8,500 signing bonus, a 20% wage increase over the life of the contract, and a 10% wage increase this year, as well as cost of living adjustments and other benefits too. Now, this comes after more than 10,000 workers walked off the job in mid-October in the first John Deere strike in more than 30 years. Now, workers were responding in part to John Deere's record high earnings of $4.69 billion in just 9 months. That is more than double what the company made the year before. But while workers saw little improvement in their paychecks, John Deere's chairman and CEO made more than $15 million in 1 year. And that was 220 times the pay of median employees. Now, across the country, we're seeing workers moving to unionize at major companies like Amazon, Starbucks, and for a historical perspective, about 35% of all U.S. workers were unionized in the 1950s. Today, it is about 11% of wage and salary workers. We still have a ton to get to here on Prime. What Kim Kardashian did for a group of Afghan girls, and our Lindsay Davis sits down with author Nicole Hannah-Jones to talk about the 1619 Project. But first, a look at our top trending stories on abcnews.com.
It was an extraordinary story.
A computer salesman was supposed to report to prison to begin a 17-year sentence.
They let him turn himself into jail with no escort.
No one thought he would run.
How do you evade capture for 25 years? How do you do that?
Now, join the search, following the U.S. Marshals as they uncover new leads in a global manhunt. Can you help catch this fugitive?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man? Listen and join the all-new hunt wherever you get your podcast.
World News Now.
And America This Morning.
The best new video.
The breaking news overnight.
Emergency crews called to the town of Surfside.
U.S. airstrikes hitting targets in Iraq and Syria.
The stories people are talking about.
You don't want to shave your legs? Don't. I was going to say.
Oh my. Got it.
And what to expect in the day ahead.
ABC World News Now and America This Morning.
Starting at 2 a.m. Eastern.
Up all night to keep you up to date.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live.
All right, we're gonna move back. Let's move back. We're surrounded by people squeezing into this bomb shelter.
We're on an urgent delivery run.
Not afraid to go there.
So my question, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Breaking news, live events.
This is the moment.
Streaming straight to you, anytime, anywhere.
You just met one friend right here.
You're watching ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us.
In Georgia, defense attorneys for the 3 white men charged with shooting and killing Ahmaud Arbery last year announced they've wrapped up their case.
It was a wild day 10 of testimony with prosecutors challenging Travis McMichael's story. Yesterday, the man who shot Arbery told the court he suspected Arbery had committed a crime but was not a threat at the time they approached him. Today, the prosecution looked to punch holes in his defense.
Never threatened you at all?
Yeah, he did not threaten me verbally, no ma'am.
McMichael maintains he shot Arbery in self-defense.
In Wisconsin, jury deliberations have ended for the day in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. Earlier, the judge banned MSNBC from the court after police said they briefly detained a freelance photographer working for the network who followed the jury bus.
He's not here today from what I'm told.
A small group of demonstrators have been gathering right outside. The Kenosha County Sheriff reminding people to stay peaceful.
Most of them are being very respectful.
A New York judge threw out the convictions of 2 men convicted nearly 6 decades ago in connection with the assassination of civil rights leader Malcolm X. It follows a 2-year investigation that found the FBI and NYPD withheld evidence from prosecutors.
I apologize on behalf of our nation's law enforcement for this decades-long injustice.
Aziz and Islam were sentenced to life in prison in 1966, along with Mujahid Abdul Halim. Halim confessed to shooting Malcolm X and told investigators Aziz and Islam were innocent, but both men were kept behind bars.
I hope the same system that was responsible for this travesty of justice also takes responsibility.
A settlement has been reached in the tragic death of Elijah McClain. Aurora, Colorado, agreeing to pay the family a record $15 million to settle a federal civil rights lawsuit over the August 2019 police killing of the 23-year-old. It's the largest police-related settlement in state history. McClain died following a police confrontation while walking home. Officers could be seen placing him in a chokehold, paramedics injecting him with ketamine, sending him into cardiac arrest. In a statement, McClain's mother thanked the community for its support, saying she hopes police reforms will prevent another similar tragedy. In Mount Vernon, Washington, a miraculous survival.
This is nothing short of a miracle, in my opinion. I don't know how she survived this.
A 46-year-old woman walked away from this pancake of mangled metal.
There's no explanation to why she's alive, let alone suffering minor injuries.
Troopers say the woman was driving her Nissan when a truck in front of her slowed down. Then she slowed down, but the semi behind her did not and smashed into the car from behind. When a trooper approached the car, he couldn't believe what he heard.
He walked up and he was walking around the car and he heard, "Help, help." And he's like, oh my goodness.
Troopers say the tow truck lifted the front end of the semi off the car. Then she miraculously crawled out of a little gap where the passenger window was.
Members of Afghanistan's women's youth development soccer team arrived in Britain today, thanks to a little help from Kim Kardashian West. The plane from Pakistan was chartered by the reality star, carrying more than 30 teenage players and their families. A nonprofit group founded by New York Rabbi Moshe Margareton helped get Kardashian involved. Now that they are out of Afghanistan, English soccer team Leeds United has offered to support the players. The Afghans will spend 10 days in coronavirus quarantine before starting new lives in Britain.
Two turkeys from Indiana are counting their lucky feathers today. The two birds were selected as national Thanksgiving turkeys and will be pardoned by President Biden at the annual ceremony at the White House Rose Garden. The turkeys, who are named Peanut Butter and Jelly, hail from Far Best Farms in Jasper, Indiana. After the pardoning ceremony, they will travel to Purdue University to live out the rest of their days. Purdue's Animal Science Research and Education Center.
Now to the upstate New York judge facing backlash tonight for sentencing an admitted rapist to probation. The 20-year-old defendant pleaded guilty to sexually assaulting 4 teenage girls, but the judge said he felt prison time would be inappropriate. Here's Elwin Lopez.
Tonight, outrage in New York after a judge ruled a man who pleaded guilty to sex crimes against 4 teenage girls, including rape and sexual assault, should not serve a single day in prison.
I agonized. I'm not ashamed to say that I actually prayed over what is the appropriate sentence in this case.
Christopher Belcher assaulted 2 15-year-olds and 2 16-year-olds in his family's home in Western New York. He was 17 at the time and tried as an adult.
I've come to feel deep shame and regret for my actions. None of you deserve to be in this situation.
One of Belcher's victims begging the judge to, quote, not let this rapist walk away, adding you have the ability to save future girls. He faced up to 8 years behind bars, but Judge Matthew Murphy determined 8 years probation was punishment enough.
There was great pain, there was great harm, there were multiple crimes committed in the case. And it seems to me that a sentence that involves incarceration or partial incarceration is inappropriate.
An attorney for one of Belcher's victims slamming the decision.
He is privileged, he comes from money, he is white, and for an adult to get away with these crimes without doing jail time is unjust.
And Trevor, that lawyer saying his client was physically sick after sentencing. And I should note that that judge is nearing mandatory retirement. This is one of his last cases on the bench. Trevor.
Elwin Lopez. Elwin, thank you. Our next guest tonight is Nicole Hannah-Jones. She is a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter who covers racial injustice for the New York Times Magazine. She's the creator of the landmark 1619 Project, and she's out with a new book, The 1619 Project, A New Origin Story. She sat down with our Lindsay Davis.
So take us to school. Explain why you feel that
1619 is a more appropriate birth year for this country than 1776?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's a more appropriate birth year. We certainly still have to acknowledge 1776 as a foundational date in American history, but what we're arguing is that 1619 actually tells you more about this country than 1776 does, and that it's a good place to kind of reframe your understanding of both our birth and who we are today.
What was your inspiration for the 1619 project?
That's hard to answer quickly, but I learned about the year 1619 in a one-semester Black Studies elective that I took in high school. There was a power both in understanding that Black people had actually been here almost as long as the English settlers, which no one had ever taught us, but also it stood in for the power of erasure, that history is not just about what we're taught, but also all of the omissions.
So the subtitle here is A New Origin Story. Would you say that you're reframing the history or rewriting the history?
We're certainly reframing it. We're reframing it to say that oftentimes when we're taught about history of the United States, that slavery is treated as marginal, as kind of an asterisk to the story. And we believe that slavery and its legacy is central, that it is a foundational part of the American story, that slavery is one of the oldest institutions in America and one of the longest. So it's not a rewriting, but it certainly is a reframing.
You also argue that we're still feeling the ripple effects from 1619 when the first slave ship came, the White Lion. Explain some of those legacies of slavery that you feel that we still are experiencing today.
The entire conceit behind the 1619 Project is that the legacy of slavery still shapes so many of our institutions today. So there are essays that talk about American capitalism, the fight for democracy that we are still seeing. I mean, you can look at the insurrection on January 6th. You can look at all of the efforts in states to restrict voting. You can look at why are we the most carceral nation in the world. So much of our the experience that we have in America has actually been shaped both by the legacy of slavery in the way that it was foundational to our law, to our culture, to our politics, but also the anti-Blackness that really justified slavery.
Critical race theory, just the term, the idea of it has really become this catch-all phrase. How do you feel that we got to that?
I mean, we know how we got to that. It's a propaganda campaign. The fact that a year ago, none of us were talking about critical race theory outside of if you were taking classes at a college or in a law school, and that we're all talking about it. If you read the 1619 Project, then you know stoking white resentment has long been a political wedge tool that's been very successful, and that's why we're all talking about critical race theory.
And how do you distinguish the two? Because some people lump it all in, the 1619 Project with critical race theory. What is the difference?
Critical race theory, of course, is a framework that says after the civil rights movement ended discrimination in the law, why do we still see so much inequality? That's all that critical race theory is. It is trying to help us understand the existing inequality that Black people face. The 1619 Project has gotten lumped in with that because people don't want the 1619 Project to be taught because it centers Black Americans and it centers slavery. The 1619 Project is a work of journalism. It's not critical race theory. It's journalism that tries to examine our country and say, how did we get here?
In response to the 1619 Project 2 years ago in the New York Times, then President Trump created the 1776 Commission to create patriotic curriculum. What do you feel his role is in the lightning rod, basically, that critical race theory has become?
I mean, clearly Trump used the idea of the 1619 Project and saying that it was not patriotic, that it was trying to destroy America as a way to stoke his base. But I think we should ask ourselves, is what we're hoping our children get a patriotic education or an education that actually is reflective of the truth of our history? I don't think our role as educators should be to build patriots. It should be to build citizens who are informed about the truth about our history and the country that we live in.
When you think about where we are in this country and what the 1619 Project sparked, do you feel that it actually has in some way, your project, changed the course of our country?
Okay, I would never have the hubris to say that any one work of journalism could change the course of our country, but I certainly think we have played a role in a larger reckoning with why our country is so divided, why there's so much inequality in our country, why we still struggle so much to live up to these great ideals. What I've heard again and again as I've talked to people since this project came out was that they've been failed by their education. They've been failed by our portrayal of America in movies and in political speeches because they had no idea that so many of these things happened. But once you get that understanding of the systemic nature of the inequality, then I think you support policies that will address it.
Do you feel that we are in a time of racial reckoning, or is this, as you describe in the book, the myth of racial progress?
Definitely, this is the myth of racial progress. I mean, over the summer last year, it certainly felt different. We'd never seen protests that large, but it was very fleeting. And we saw that support, particularly among white Americans, decline pretty rapidly after a couple of months. I think that what we are most comfortable with as Americans is saying, yes, it was bad back then, but it's not like that anymore. And yes, we have inequality now, but one day in the future it's going to get better, and then that alleviates us of the need to act. And there's a lot of suffering happening right now, and we should be doing something about it.
Our thanks to Lindsay Davis for that conversation. And before we go tonight, the image of the day. This is the French village of Beaujeu, where every year on the third Thursday of November, connoisseurs of the Beaujolais Nouveau wine revel in the streets, sharing their love of wine with each other. This is a tradition that was interrupted in large part last year because of the pandemic. It is clear, though, Beaujolais fans are unleashing a new spirit. And with that, we say au revoir. That is our show for this hour. Stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thanks for streaming with us. Coming up in the next hour, we're staying on top of several stories. Serena Williams, the latest to weigh in as concerns about a missing Chinese tennis star grow louder. And we're keeping an eye on that critical holiday week forecast. It could be a stormy one depending on where you are and where you're going.
Powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline. Now streaming on ABC News Live. 2020. True crime. Cinematic. Real-life drama. Stunning. The unthinkable. Follow the clues. The hunt. True crime. 2020. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
Can I hug you? Yes. So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 12 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live.
All right, we're gonna move out. Let's move out.
We're surrounded by people squeezing into this bomb shelter.
We're on an urgent delivery run with.
Not afraid to go there.
So my question, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Breaking news, live events.
This is the moment.
Streaming straight to you, anytime, anywhere.
You just met one friend right here.
You're watching ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us.
Good evening, I'm Trevor Ault. Thanks for streaming with us. We are monitoring several developments here at ABC News at this hour. In the Wisconsin trial of Kyle Rittenhouse, the jury has now been deliberating for more than 23 hours and still no verdict. But the judge today alerting the court of what he called a very serious matter and banning MSNBC from the trial. He did so after a Kenosha police officer said they pulled over a man affiliated with the network who told them that he ran a red light because he was told to follow the jury bus. NBC said they regret the incident. 2 suspected Iranian computer hackers have been charged in a case of massive election interference aimed at sowing anger and confusion among American voters during last year's presidential race. The campaign tried to intimidate U.S. voters using bogus emails and fabricated videos. Difficult photos to see here from Oakland, Florida, a horrific scene of domestic violence. Police say they show former NFL player Zach Stacy beating his ex-girlfriend Kristen Evans in front of their 5-month-old son. Authorities are searching for Stacy. They believe he has fled the state. And the cold weather COVID surge is already happening. Cases are up 35% since late October. And with families preparing to gather next week for the Thanksgiving holiday, the FDA is expected to give the green light to Pfizer and Moderna for all adults to get booster shots. This comes after more than a dozen states already approved the boosters for all adults. Wood Johnson has more.
Tonight, the FDA expected to authorize booster shots for all adults at any moment, paving the way for a robust rollout of third doses this weekend.
The rate of disease is markedly lower for those who received their booster shot, demonstrating our boosters are working.
But today, Massachusetts and Utah joining a dozen other states and getting ahead of the CDC, allowing Pfizer and Moderna boosters for everyone 18 and older.
What we're seeing is that with immunity waning and cases climbing, there's a recognition that anyone over 18 with the right amount of time should be eligible for a booster.
The booster buildup coming amid growing fears of another winter surge. Cases across the country are up 35% since late October. 18 states seeing an increase in hospital admissions. In New Mexico, doctors struggling to care for a stream of COVID patients.
Our situation right now is dire. Most of these patients are unvaccinated. This is overwhelming our healthcare system.
In Maine, Bettina Lorman was unvaccinated and ended up on a ventilator with COVID.
I love you.
In a coma for more than a month, her family was already planning a funeral when they got a call from the doctor.
I need you to come up to the hospital right away. I'm like, what? Is something wrong? And he goes, well, your mother just woke up. I literally dropped the phone. I was like, what? I mean, because we were supposed to be terminating life support that day.
Loved ones calling it a medical miracle, saying Bettina now plans to get vaccinated when she's better.
I think the right thing to do is to get vaccinated. So if one of our family members gets it again, it won't be that bad.
Our thanks to Whit Johnson. Now to the murder trial of 3 men accused of killing Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. Today, the defense rested its case after defendant Travis McMichael took the stand for a second day. McMichael made what could be a key admission. Here's ABC senior national correspondent Steve Osunsami.
Outside the Glynn County Courthouse in Georgia today, hundreds of black pastors and people closely watching this case came to pray with the family of Ahmaud Arbery and their legal team.
God, we're looking for a miracle.
Inside the courtroom, where the family is hoping for justice, prosecutors continued to question one of the 3 men accused of murder and other charges in this racially explosive case.
How many times have you pulled up on strangers that you don't know next to them with a pickup truck to ask them what they're doing in your neighborhood?
I don't think I have in that situation, but I have pulled up on people that are running behind, coming up behind them.
Travis McMichael, who fired the fatal shots that killed Arbery in February of last year, had to admit that before the shooting, his victim posed him no physical or verbal threat.
Never threatened you at all?
No, ma'am. Yeah, he did not threaten me verbally. No, ma'am.
All right. Didn't brandish any weapons?
No, ma'am.
Didn't pull out any guns?
No, ma'am.
Didn't pull out any knife?
No, ma'am.
Never reached for anything, did he?
No.
He just ran?
Yes, he was just running.
McMichael, his father Gregory McMichael, and a neighbor William Roddy Bryan have all pleaded not guilty. They say they were trying to make a citizen's arrest under then Georgia law, but prosecutors say the victim wasn't the thief they were thinking and wasn't the only person seen wandering this home that was under construction in the neighborhood. Today, we heard from other neighbors, at least 2 of them women of color, who were witnesses for the defense. They testified that the issue was crime and that they felt scared seeing strangers on neighborhood security cameras.
Violated. Upset that my kids weren't getting to grow up in the safe neighborhood I grew up in.
Steve Osunsami, thank you. To Washington now, and the House tonight making a big move on the second part of President Biden's domestic agenda, that massive human infrastructure bill. So let's get straight to ABC's Stephanie Ramos. Stephanie, this is a big step tonight, but there is, of course, still a long road ahead here, right?
Exactly, Trevor. The House is moving forward tonight to vote on this sweeping bill, which comes at a $1.75 trillion price tag. But this bill dedicates a record $500 billion to fighting climate change. It includes money for universal pre-K, elder care, and a 1-year extension of the child tax credit. It also would expand Medicare to cover hearing and bring down the cost of prescription drugs. Also included paid family leave, but that is likely on the chopping block when this heads over to the Senate, and that's because of moderate Joe Manchin. We've heard from him the last couple of weeks. He is opposed to paid family leave. He says he is worried about the cost of the bill amid rising inflation. But the White House says this bill pays for itself. And tonight, the Congressional Budget Office agrees. But Trevor, there is still a really long road ahead. This bill facing major headwinds in the Senate, where President Biden cannot afford to lose a single Democratic vote. Trevor.
And we already saw the hair splitting to get the first bill passed. Stephanie Ramos from Washington. Stephanie, thank you. Next tonight, there is outrage and demands for answers in the tennis world and beyond following the abrupt disappearance of Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai after she accused one of China's top leaders of sexual assault. Now, Chinese state media has tried to refute her allegations, and they claim that the star is safe and sound. Kaylee Hartung reports.
She's the latest major tennis star to voice outrage and concern over the disappearance of Chinese tennis player Peng Shuai. Serena Williams tweeting, "I am devastated and shocked to hear about the news of my peer Peng Shuai. I hope she is safe and found as soon as possible. This must be investigated and we must not stay silent." Sending love to her and her family during this incredibly difficult time. The Grand Slam doubles champion has not been seen publicly in 2 weeks, her social media going dark after alleging she was sexually assaulted 3 years ago by a former high-ranking Chinese government official. The head of the Women's Tennis Association now questioning Shuai's safety after receiving what he considers to be a fraudulent email, supposedly from the athlete, in which she called the allegation of sexual assault not true, adding, "I am not missing, nor am I unsafe. I've just been resting at home and everything is fine. Thank you again for caring about me." As the mystery deepens, the White House pressed about it today.
We have, of course, seen the reports. We unfortunately just don't have any additional information on it.
And Trevor, at a news conference today, Beijing's foreign ministry spokesman brushed off questions about Shuai's whereabouts, and then any mention of her name was scrubbed from the official transcript of that news conference. Trevor.
Kaylee Hartung, thank you. Now to the temperature whiplash and the possible holiday travel nightmare for millions. Our senior meteorologist, Rob Marciano, tracking it all. Rob, good evening.
Hey, good evening, Trevor. Very dynamic weather pattern shaping up for the eastern half of the country, beginning with that big temperature swing that most of us are going to feel here. We've already felt it in places like Chicago and much of the upper Midwest and Great Lakes. Temperatures there in the 30s and 40s. Meanwhile, today, temperatures on the East Coast were in the 60s. So that front will push through tonight with a little bit of rainfall and then windy and colder by 20 or 30 degrees by tomorrow morning, and 40 degrees all the way down to Atlanta. Sets the stage for a pretty quiet but cold weekend for much of the country. And then this next system kind of drops in from Canada as a clipper into the Great Lakes. By Monday morning, it really starts to develop and intensify. And we're probably going to see some problems. This is when people obviously start to travel for the holidays. So Chicago O'Hare, Detroit, Cleveland, Cincinnati, I think we'll see winds. We'll see some snow potentially accumulating, and mostly rain, but still an issue from Charlotte up through the New York airports and then through Boston. And then this low continues to progress off towards the east and kind of digs and develops a coastal low and scoops another low up into it. And when that happens, these things tend to sit. And this one's going to sit off the east coast of New England. And here's a map for 5 in the morning on Wednesday. A lot of wind behind this, certainly some snow. Probably just accumulating in places like Albany and points northward. But the question is, how long does this low sit and spin on Wednesday, potentially Thursday and Friday will determine how big of a mess we have through the holiday itself and into the holiday weekend. We could see very breezy conditions for a good chunk of it, but it's too early to tell at this point. But prepare yourself if you are doing some traveling anywhere in the eastern third of the country to have to deal with some weather impacts, certainly the beginning of this holiday. Trevor?
We've had more than our fair share of extreme weather events this year, Rob, and we keep hearing about how climate change is directly tied to that. But these heavy rain events are tied to that too, right? What role is climate change playing here?
Well, we know that with a warmer atmosphere, that's going to allow the atmosphere to hold more water. That's just a physical stat and fact. And with every degree increase in Celsius that we have globally, that makes for about a 7% increase in the amount of water vapor or potential for seeing rain out of those clouds. And depending on where you are in the world, that could jump up to, say 20%. And we've seen that. Decadally, an increase of about 1/10 of an inch globally since 1900. And we're certainly quantifying that here in the U.S. since 1950. I want to show you this map. 2021's wettest day, about 3/4 of our wettest day in these spots were above average because of climate change. So you increase the temperatures, you're going to increase the rainfall, and you're certainly going to increase the extreme rainfall events. And we've seen that certainly in the past 5 to 10 years, and that is really the most frightening thing. That's where we get this flash flooding, the deadly rainfall of events, and those unfortunately will be increasing because of the simple fact that the atmosphere can hold more water if it is warmer, and we certainly know things are warming. We got to try to slow it, but at some point, we got to deal with heavier rain, Trevor.
A whole lot more than the planet simply getting a little warmer. Rob Marciano, thanks so much.
You bet.
And as we continue to report on the different impacts our behavior has on the environment, one angle not discussed nearly enough is the fashion industry. It is one of the main offenders of greenhouse gas emissions, producing 10% of humanity's carbon emissions, creating tons of waste in the process, and also being built largely on worker exploitation. So we want to bring in Ahmaud Arbery. She is a sustainability consultant and the author of a new book, Consumed: The Need for Collective Change, Colonialism, Climate Change. It's been really interesting and enlightening in a number of different directions. I want to get right into the meat of it, Ahmaud. You write that the average American consumer, I believe, is responsible for purchasing one mid-price article of clothing a week. We are now getting into shopping season here with the holidays. So, I mean, in a broad sense, what do you want people to know here?
I think I would like for people to understand that we're really buying too much, and it's actually harming us. It's not good for the planet. We know it's not good for the garment workers, and we know additionally that it's actually not good for us. Like, the idea of credit card debt is kind of at an all-time high in states in the US and both the UK. And so I think it's time for us to look a little bit at the system and look at the messaging that happens, not just in advertising, but in social media for sure, and start to maybe make some different decisions about how we spend our money.
I'm glad you brought up advertising and social media, because I feel like I have seen a lot about consumerism and why that's bad, but you worded it in a way that was different than I had seen it before, which is that in a lot of ways, we are made to feel poor. And there's a lot of people that are struggling with poverty, but there are people who can live perfectly comfortable lives but feel like they need to have everything else. What do you think people should maybe be on the lookout for to try to deprogram themselves from that?
I think that consumerism is actually very much at the heart of our society, and it sort of sneaks in sneaky ways. I mean, I think from a very young age, you know, I remember being on university campuses and being offered things like credit cards when I had zero money management skills. And so ultimately, I think that we need to really unpick our culture and start looking at ways that we can find happiness that don't have to do with, you know, adding to our credit card debt.
Your book is divided into two parts. It's not just entirely like what people can do individually to change their habits. The first half of the book is really explaining how we got there, and you can understand that in the title, talking about colonialism and a lot of different facets to it: racism, sexism, capitalism, all of that. I know that you say that 95% of global CEOs of large fast fashion brands are men, 80% of garment workers are women. Can you talk maybe in the global sense of what are the forces that brought us to this point now?
Well, I think you really have to go back into the history of our modern day times. And, you know, when we learn about things like, for instance, slavery in schools, we learn about cotton in this very removed sense. We say, okay, they were, you know, the slaves were forced to grow cotton, but we don't talk about how cotton kickstarted our Industrial Revolution and how that was the backbone of so many different economies. And that idea of chattel slavery got us to this place today where clothing is actually super accessible and super cheap. And ultimately, it's a system that has been hundreds of years in the making. What we see today is actually the result of hundreds of years of exploitation at different places.
And kind of on that subject, Aja, you mentioned in the book that 71% of our global emissions are from 100 companies. Now, we're talking about multinational corporations here in a giant global movement, really. I think it would be natural for a person to say, my purchases are a drop in an ocean, and my changes are not going to make systemic change. What would you tell that person?
We need all the things. Systemic change doesn't come when we say, well, nothing to do with me. The thing is, you know, I try not to sit from a position of judgment and going, oh, well, I don't buy fast fashion anymore, so this isn't my problem. I was the person that bought fast fashion. I would argue most people I know at some point have bought fast fashion. When those of us that understand how this system works start to do things differently, whether that is buying more secondhand items, whether that is, you know, putting yourself on a clothing allowance for a year and saying, I'm not going to buy 60, 50 items a year. This year, I'm going to buy 20 items, and they have to be really good. And I might spend a little bit more money to make sure that I'm supporting a company that aligns with my values. When it is a bunch of us doing that, that is when the titans of the industry start to lose some of the power that they have.
And Aja, if people are looking to buy your book, do you have a preferred way that they could do it?
I love an independent bookstore. I love bookshop.org. Yeah, I have. If you have an independent bookstore in your neighborhood, please support them, because I think it's really important for us to really spread our money around and make sure that we're supporting the businesses where our values actually align. Because when you shop indie, especially in your neck of the woods, you're actually putting money back into your community. So that's a win for everyone.
All right, Aja Barber, thanks so much. So that you heard her right there. If you can find your own neighborhood bookstore, go and buy Consumed, The Need for Collective Change, Colonialism, Climate Change, and Consumerism. Aja Barber, thanks so much for your time. And still to come, in West Africa, a sign that in at least one country, majestic forest elephants are thriving. And the holidays bring joy, but they can also be difficult, even painful. We'll talk to Anna Sale, the author of Let's Talk About Hard Things, who has some advice on tough but important conversations.
The ladies you love, the hottest topics happening now. There's only one place to find it all.
You guys are having the hard conversations. I love The View.
The most watched #1 daytime talk show is The View. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
Let's do this.
When you wake up in the morning, when you wake up in the morning, darling, I'll be by your side. I'll be there by your side. I'll be everything you wanted. I'll be there by your side. If you need a light to shine it, hold out your hand, let the stars shoot again, let the light
Americans choose ABC News, America's #1 news source.
And we're tracking several headlines around the world. Some encouraging news out of Gabon on the critically endangered African forest elephant. A new wildlife conservation study released today found the Central African nation is harboring nearly 100,000 forest elephants. That is much higher than previous estimates. Gabon is known for being one of the last remaining strongholds for these majestic animals. COVID-19 deaths in Russia hit record highs for a second straight day, with nearly 2,500 lives lost to the virus in the past 2 days. Health experts there blame the latest surge in infections on low vaccination rates and people not taking enough precautions. And the Kremlin is now saying new restrictions will take effect next year, limiting access to many public places for unvaccinated Russians. And the escalating tensions in the South China Sea. Chinese Coast Guard ships blocked and sprayed a powerful stream of water at 2 Philippine boats carrying supplies to troops at a disputed shoal. The Philippine Foreign Secretary says no one was hurt in the incident, but urged Chinese officials to back off. President Biden has repeatedly assured the Philippines the U.S. will honor its obligation under the nation's Mutual Defense Treaty if Philippine forces, ships, or aircraft come under attack. With Thanksgiving next Thursday, the holidays are fast approaching, and a lot of us will soon be sitting around the table with friends and family. Of course, it has been a really tough 20 months, and these holidays are often difficult already. So naturally, people might have mixed emotions about being around other people and maybe approaching certain uncomfortable topics. So to help us break down what we can do to take care of ourselves and each other is Anna Sale. She is the host of New York Public Radio's Death, Sex, and Money, and the author of the book, Let's Talk About Hard Things. Anna, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I know that you're a big advocate for people opening up about these things. I also don't think that you want people to sit down at Thanksgiving and say, I'm broke and I'm hooking up with strangers all the time, or whatever. What's the happy medium here for talking about these difficult topics, Anna?
I agree with you, Trevor. I think that what I advocate for when I say let's talk about hard things is I think it can be really caring and loving to make space for the people we love to be curious about what they've been going through. And all of us in some way have been changed and gone through something difficult over the last 20 months. And so rather than sort of like try to keep things polite and positive all the time, which I think can be sort of the intention that we have when we get with family, is to if you hear something where someone, maybe your parent or an adult sibling, like refers to something that was challenging that you didn't know about, to just take a break, take a minute and say like, oh, I didn't know that was going on. What was that like for you? And to listen, because that can really sort of fortify and reinforce bonds with people that we've unfortunately been apart from for a long time for a lot of us.
I'm glad you brought up listening, Anna, because that was going to be one of my questions, is on top of simply being more vulnerable and opening up about ourselves, how can we be more receptive to the things that other people are dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, I think listening it's an active process. And I think in particular with family, it can be really difficult to take in information that you're hearing and not sort of immediately go into reacting into like whether that fits with where you are, how you would see things. And I think that you can think about maybe they're saying something that would be not the way you see things. You can listen, you can be curious, and then you can come back and say, I actually don't see it the same way. And to kind of give each other both space to explain where they're coming from and to feel like they're being respected.
The holidays are especially, can be especially stressful, Anna, because finances are often linked to a lot of the traditions there. If people maybe tend to be private about something like that, do you have any advice on maybe starting to dip a toe into opening up or being more vulnerable?
Yeah, I mean, I think that gatherings provide these sort of interesting ways that we can talk about contributing and sharing responsibility without having to explicitly talk about money. For example, if there's a big family gathering, like being, it's very generous if you are a guest to say, like, what can I bring? Here's what I'm thinking about bringing. And that's a way to be supportive and not have the expectation that whoever's hosting is going to be providing and paying for everything that everybody's going to be eating. And because I think that one thing to keep in mind with this holiday season in particular is that, like, as we've been apart, you may feel changed, and you also don't know how all your family members have been changed. So it's sort of looking for signals about, are there things the ways we used to do things that we need to update? Maybe somebody has less work than they used to, or, maybe somebody who used to be a college student is now a young adult and like would benefit from being asked to bring a side dish or something and sort of take a more adult role in a family gathering. So I think that there's ways to sort of suss out some of those changes by asking things like, how are we going to do the meal planning, and opening that up and having a conversation.
How about if a person maybe starts a conversation that they're looking to open up with their family and their other family member is not receptive to that? Is there a way to maybe gracefully back out of that?
I think that all of us have had that experience in some way with family. I mean, I think one really key piece of advice that I have is if you are someone who feels like there's something you need to talk about with a family member, it's thinking about first, like, how do I want this conversation to start? Again, like maybe not doing it at the Thanksgiving dinner table with the rest of the family listening in, but, taking your opportunity when you're, stirring the potatoes in the kitchen and you're alone with your mother to say, like, I need to talk to you about something important. Is now a good time? Or do you want to take a walk tomorrow morning? Like, create space so that there is room to have a kind of different sort of conversation than just the quick kind of catch up and chit chat. So all you can do is indicate that that's something you wish for. And maybe it won't happen this holiday season. Maybe it'll happen on a phone call 6 months from now. But if you feel that urge to have that conversation, I urge you to try.
And I would love to know, because I'm sure people are watching, maybe interested in getting your book, and they certainly hear your polished radio voice. You read the audio book, right?
I did.
Okay, so that's available too. If you'd like to hear Anna read her book to you, Death, Sex, and Money, Anna Sale. We appreciate your wonderful insight. Hopefully, we can help some people out this Thanksgiving and beyond.
I hope so. Thank you, Trevor.
And that's our show for tonight. Stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Trevor Alt in for Lindsay Davis. Thanks for streaming with us, and have a great night.